MAGA plus MIGA equals mega. MAGA is make America great again. MIGA evidently is make India great again. And mega is just mega. Our Prime Minister rattled this off in front of the President of the United States and the global media with the self-confidence of having just discovered the second part to Pythagoras' theorem.
MAGA plus MIGA तब बन जाता है mega.
But Trump wasn't too impressed. Days before the meeting, he had imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports into the US, which impacts India among others. Hours before meeting Modi, Trump calls a press conference to announce reciprocal tariffs, which basically means that whatever other countries are charging the US on its exports, US will apply the same tariff on them. But he didn't just stop there. He singled out India and said India has more tariffs than nearly any other country. It's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers. Now, I am not a foreign policy expert, but someone please explain to me how this was a diplomatic win for India. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but India has been bending over backwards to be nice to Trump ever since he got elected. Prime Minister Modi was one of the first international leaders to congratulate him. Then in the budget, the finance minister cut tariffs across electronics, textiles, and also high-end motorcycles, in part to appease the US. Even before Modi boarded the plane, there were reports suggesting that India was proactively, on its own, thinking of reducing tariffs on over 30 items, including luxury vehicles, solar cells, and chemicals.
And bringing down the average customs duty rates which are applicable in India is from 11.65% to 10.66%. It's a drastic reduction.
And let's not forget, one of the first things Foreign Minister Jaishankar discussed with the US was India's willingness to accept illegal immigrants back from the US. In the process, giving the Trump administration an early political win, where they had the opportunity to run tough-looking visuals of Indian deportees being chained up and being sent back in subhuman conditions in a military plane.
Describing the ordeal of being handcuffed, legs chained and struggling to use the washroom for nearly 40 hours. Among the 104 Indians deported, they reveal the inhumane treatment they faced.
So despite India doing all of this, I scratch your back, please leave my back alone, when our Prime Minister walked into that room to meet Trump, it is a little disconcerting that Trump instead rained down tariff fire on India. He was literally dissing India in front of Prime Minister Modi in their joint press conference.
It's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers, very strong tariffs. We are right now a reciprocal nation.
Reminds you of that scene in the web series Panchayat where the Dulha's friend, after being really miffed with Sachiv ji, says, "Gajab bejati hai." So when Trump announced tariffs against other countries, Canada, Mexico, China, they reacted angrily. They said that this wasn't okay. They threatened tit for tat tariffs. But in contrast, Prime Minister Modi didn't really react much. He didn't say that it was unfair when Trump was berating India on trade in front of him. Instead, he went on this tangent on this MAGA, MIGA, Ina Mina Dika stuff. So what's really going on with US and India on tariffs? Hello and welcome to The Bond Economist, your one-stop destination for professional advice on the economy. My name is Auradeep Nandi. And today we talk about Trump's threat to impose reciprocal tariffs. What does it mean? What is it that Trump wants? What are the implications of this on India? And how is India reacting? As always, if you like what you see, please hit like and subscribe. And if you'd like to contribute, feel free to scan the QR code or hit the super thanks button below. First things first, how important is US trade for India and what exactly did Trump announce? Well, US is India's largest export destination. The goods exports account for nearly 18% of India's overall global exports and over 2% of its GDP. By the way, we are not even considering services in this, for which US is also a key customer for India. Even within goods, some of India's largest and most employment-generating industries, gems and jewelry, textiles, apparels, electrical machinery, petroleum products, iron and steel, auto, chemicals have all grown because of crucial access to the US market, be it selling directly to the US consumer or to US companies to be part of their supply chain. In fact, India runs a trade surplus with the US. That is, we export more than we import, which is kind of important for us because on an aggregate, it's the opposite for India. We import more than we export. We run a massive trade deficit on goods. So the trade surplus with the US does matter. And you can see how much it has zoomed up in recent years. So Prime Minister Modi is right to be fearful of what Trump can do if things go out of hand. But what's interesting is that from a purely trade perspective, India should actually be small fish for the US. If you crunch the numbers from the WITS database, China runs a trade surplus of over $400 billion with the US, Mexico around $135 billion, Canada, Germany, Japan in the $70 to $90 billion range. India is around $40 billion. It's a little surprising that Trump so often goes ballistic on India. Maybe because he sees India as an untapped market. We are, after all, the world's most populous country with arguably higher growth rates than most other countries and a rising class of aspirational and rich consumers. And actually, Trump does have a point. India's tariffs against the US is higher than most of what other countries charge American exports. India's effective tariff against the US is around 9.5% on average, which is higher than other top trading partners of the US and much higher than the 3% that US has on Indian exports. But there is a reason for this. It is actually common for developing countries to have higher tariffs than developed ones because they are weaker economies, their domestic industries need more protection. Also, when there is a large population like ours, there is going to be strong demand for imports. So higher import duties are a good source of government revenue. But that said, Donald Trump is in no mood for this bleating. His point is simple. If you're charging higher tariffs against the US, we will match that tariff. So, say for instance, India, as a matter of fact, any other country, is charging, say, 70% tariff on luxury cars, then US is like, too bad. We will also charge 70% tariff on any luxury cars being exported out of your country. In fact, not only will the US match that tariff, but the US will also factor in non-tariff barriers in deciding the level of retaliatory tariffs. Non-tariff barriers are when a country gives unfair subsidies to its industries or sets such unrealistically high quality standards.
They do tests on cars, like dropping a bowling ball on the hood of a car, and if the hood doesn't withstand it, which no hood would except for an army tank, then they say, I'm sorry, you can't sell your car.
Or say the country isn't protecting intellectual property enough. So when American goods land in the country and someone copies them, then the laws and institutions aren't working to catch and penalize this illegal activity. So, you could keep your tariff low, but if you've created such a hostile business environment that makes entry into your market too difficult, then the low tariff makes little sense. So, Trump wants to consider, one, the actual tariff, and two, these non-tariff barriers, and then set the retaliatory tariffs accordingly. All of this sounds like a massive tariff tsunami is about to hit India. So, how concerned should we be? First, Trump is likely to struggle to put this in practice. It's not as simple as announcing tariffs on a few categories or a few countries. You are now planning regulatory tariffs on every product available out there that is entering into the US. Let me give you a flavor of how messy this could get. Now, usually for every category of product, there is a unique identifying number called the HSN code, Harmonized System of Nomenclature. These are common codes agreed upon globally for classifying products. So let's say you want to import a watch. How will you know how much tariff you have to pay? Well, you look up that HSN code of that watch and check what the government of India is charging against that code. Now, there are so many of such unique product categories that HSN codes like phone numbers run all the way to 8 digits, sometimes even 10 digits. So that's the level of granularity of classification there is. For instance, 2204 is the HSN code for wine. Then 220421 is the code for wine in containers holding 2 liters and less. Then within it, 22042110 is port and other red wines. So you can imagine the level to which customs codes exist. Now, the US is saying that for each of these codes, we will figure out how much a country is charging us and then apply the same tariffs. That's checking thousands of products for, probably nearly 200 countries. Someone in the US government who hasn't yet been fired by Elon Musk will have to work day in and day out to meet Trump's deadline of rolling all of this out by April. So, let's say they manage to do this exercise. What happens to all those products where US is a major exporter to other countries, but it's not the other way around? So, for instance, US is probably the largest exporter to India on almonds and pistachios, and will obviously want lower tariffs. But if India is not exporting these nuts to the US, India will be like, lagao na, reciprocal tariff. it doesn't hurt us. So for such products, US will have to separately negotiate the tariffs. And even if we get all this bureaucracy out of the way, there is the curious issue of the MFN clause, or what I like to call the Hum Saath Saath Hai clause. MFN stands for Most Favored Nation. Basically, it's a principle by which countries that are part of the World Trade Organization or the WTO can't favor one trading partner and not extend the same benefit to other member countries. So, if you reduce tariffs for the US, then you have to extend that same courtesy to all other trading partners. But here's the problem. Suppose India is forced to reduce its import duties on, say, agri products for the US. It may not be keen to open up Indian markets similarly to, say, Australia or New Zealand, because then our domestic farmers could get overrun by cheap foreign imports. And so when the US as the big boss is threatening reciprocal tariffs and hence forcing countries to lower tariffs for US goods, the key question is, what will then happen to this MFN clause? Will countries be ready to offer those same concessional tariffs amongst themselves too, as the norm currently is? Or will the whole MFN principle just collapse? I mean, to be fair, there are ways around this. You can have a special trade deal with a country, and that exempts you from giving the same concessions to others. But the point is that all of this is not as simple as Trump giving long autographs on A4-sized sheets of paper. Also, let's not overlook the obvious. US is a huge consumption machine. It's one thing to apply higher tariffs on one or a few countries, but doing it against all your suppliers across the world will immediately translate to higher prices for US consumers and US companies that rely on inputs from the rest of the world. And that will not only increase inflation, but will also make American companies uncompetitive. Now, one of the reasons why Trump can maintain his current bravado that, oh, I can do what I want, is because the actual impact of these tariffs on the US economy are yet to materialize. Now, Trump's idea is that US may not have to ultimately pull the trigger on these high tariffs because countries will be bullied to the negotiating table and trade deals will be hammered out where lower tariffs are eventually agreed upon. And two, eventually companies will want to shift their manufacturing back to the US to avoid the high tariffs and in the process create more American jobs. See, over the decades, US manufacturing has indeed been literally hollowed out thanks to globalization, where cheap production costs in countries like China, Mexico, and some other Asian countries have led many US companies to move large parts of their supply chains abroad. And a lot of countries, including India, owe their success to this business model. So Trump's main thesis is that, okay, if lower costs abroad is what is hitting American factories and jobs, well, let's jack up that cost. Let us overturn the current global status quo on trade and then see how companies find it simpler to move their manufacturing back to the US. So what does all of this mean for India? So as we just discussed, there are some serious issues around the implementation of these reciprocal tariffs. So we don't know for sure how much of this is bark and how much of this is actually going to be bite. Also, as India is not the only one being singled out, ultimately the question that Indian pharma company or auto ancillary company has to ask itself is, after the tariff dust settles, am I still relatively competitive compared to my other global peers who have been hit by similar restrictions? So they may find that on a relative basis, they continue to survive despite the tariffs. The other side of the equation is US entering into Indian markets. It's actually interesting what Modi is trying to offer Trump. India is saying that, okay, President Trump, you want to reduce the overall trade surplus with India. Don't go crazy on tariffs and create problems for our export industries. Instead, how about we import more from you? So that will also bring down the trade surplus. We need crude oil. Let's get that from you. We need defense equipment. Let's get F-35 fighter jets from you. But here's the thing. It's not going to be as simple as India just buying fighter jets off the shelf. India needs to figure out the cost, the maintenance, the extent of technology transfer, also the fact that much of our existing military infrastructure remains Russian. India has recently procured Russia's S-400 air defense system, and reports suggest that the US is not comfortable selling F-35s to countries that use this system. So it's easier said than done. I guess the broad US game plan is to get India in its sphere of influence away from Russia. And the easiest way to do that is to target its two key weaknesses, oil and defense. So, for all you know, by importing more from the US and less from Russia, India's overall import levels on a macro level may still remain under control. Other sectors will also see action. Sectors like cars, motorcycles, alcohol, where Indian consumers, particularly those in the higher end of the income spectrum, will get more choices and lower prices. These imports will inevitably hit Indian companies, but it's a double-edged sword. If you are a company competing in the category of, say, Harley Davidsons or Bourbons, then life could get difficult for you. But this is not going to be the story for all companies. As we had flagged at the start, India's trade surplus with the US is much smaller than with other countries, particularly China and countries through which Chinese companies manage to access the US, countries like Mexico and Vietnam. So the real showdown is going to happen with them. And when US and China fight, global companies will increasingly look to shift some of their supply chains away from China to more low risk and US friendly economies, countries like India. So India should be doing its best to capitalize on this looming global trade upheaval. We in fact covered this in detail in our previous video on US-India relationship under the second Trump presidency. I'll leave the link in the description. So if you look at the recent union budget, India's aim now seems to be that let's reduce the tariffs on intermediate products or inputs needed by Indian factories so that it's cheaper for them to manufacture their final goods. So what is probably in the back of the government's mind is, how can I reduce tariffs against the US in such a way that it may seem like I'm doing Trump a favor, but actually I'm also making it cheaper for Indian companies to import those inputs and helping them with their manufacturing. But again, let's be pragmatic about this. Most of our industrial inputs actually comes from China. It's one of the reasons why we run such a huge trade deficit with it. So the overall impact on the economy may be more limited. The point is that both MAGA and MIGA may seem catchy acronyms, but the real world is much more complicated. Because Prime Minister Modi may not admit this, but make America great again may not always work with making India great again. MAGA's ultimate goal is to have global companies set up manufacturing operations in the US, create American jobs, and add to US economic growth. Make in India has the same ambition for India. So, I am no marketing guru, but let me try correcting Prime Minister Modi's formula. MAGA plus MIGA equal to mega compromises. The question is, who makes them? For more such insights, like, share, and subscribe to The Bond Economist.